I always believed that trust was the foundation of family. You raise your children with love, sacrifice your own dreams for theirs, and in return, you expect honesty, respect, maybe even a little gratitude. I thought my daughter, Lily, understood that. I thought she saw how much I worked, how many nights I stayed awake balancing bills, cooking dinners, and making sure she never missed out on anything. I thought she appreciated the life I built for her. Even if it wasn't perfect, it was full of love. But life has a cruel way of showing you that sometimes love isn't enough. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet and ordinary. I remember the sound of the kettle whistling, the faint smell of toast, and the sunlight sneaking through the kitchen curtains. I was humming an old song as I reached for my phone, smiling as I saw a text from my friend reminding me about our lunch plans. Everything felt peaceful until I noticed something strange through the window. The driveway. My driveway looked empty. I frowned, peering closer. My silver sedan, the car I'd had for nearly 12 years, wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe I'd parked it on the street last night, but I knew I hadn't. I never did. I always parked in the same spot, right outside the porch. I felt my stomach twist as I stepped outside, barefoot, the cool morning air brushing against my skin. The driveway was completely bare. The car was gone. My heart began to race. I looked up and down the street, checking if it had been towed or stolen, but there was nothing. Just silence. Panic started bubbling inside me, but it wasn't until I turned back toward the house that I noticed something else. Lily's bedroom door was open, her backpack half-zipped on the floor, and her shoes missing. A cold wave of realization hit me. No, she couldn't have. I called her name, my voice shaky, hoping she'd answer. Lily? No response. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number, straight to voicemail. My fingers trembled. 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind. Maybe she borrowed it for an emergency. Maybe something happened. But deep down, something felt wrong. Something deliberate. I called the police to report the car missing, still clinging to the hope that it was stolen. But when they asked if anyone else had access to the keys, I froze. The silence on my end was heavy. Because yes, Lily did. She had a spare key. My mind tried to protect my heart from the truth, but I could already feel it cracking. 2 hours later, when she finally called back, her tone was calm. Too calm. "Mom, don't freak out," she said. I needed some money. Okay, my blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? Where's my car?" She hesitated and then said the words that still echo in my head. "I sold it." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I remember gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. "You what?" I whispered. She repeated it as if it was nothing, as if she hadn't just torn apart something that meant so much to me. "I sold it. I'll pay you back. I swear." "Pay me back?" She didn't understand. That car wasn't just metal and paint. It was the first thing I bought after my divorce, my symbol of independence, my proof that I could survive on my own. It carried every memory, every grocery run, every late-night drive to clear my mind. And she sold it for what? When I asked her why, her answer cut deeper than any betrayal could. "I needed money for my trip," she said flatly. "You wouldn't help me, so I helped myself." I felt my throat tighten. "Lily, That car was not yours to sell, I shouted, my voice breaking. She just sighed. You never support me, Mom. You care more about that stupid car than my dreams. That word dreams burned in my chest. Because all I ever wanted was for her to chase them, but not like this, not by betraying me. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room, replaying every moment of her childhood in my mind. The first time she called me Mom, her first dance recital, her first heartbreak. I raised her to be strong, to be kind, and yet somewhere along the way, she learned to take, to deceive, to justify her betrayal. I cried until there were no tears left. But as the tears dried, something else took their place. A cold, steady determination. She wanted to chase her dream at the cost of my trust. She wanted to teach me a lesson about priorities. Fine, but I would teach her one about consequences. Asterisk the confrontation and the breaking point. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a stranger in my own home. The quietness around me was too heavy, too sharp, like the air itself was holding a grudge. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the empty space where my car keys used to hang. I could still see the faint outline on the wall, a small mark from years of habit. Every morning, I would grab those keys, drive to work, and feel proud of what I had built. After the divorce, I had lost almost everything. But that car was my freedom, my fresh start, and now my own daughter had taken that from me without even thinking twice. I tried to call her again, but she did not answer, not once, not twice, nothing. I messaged her over and over, asking her to come home to explain, but she only replied hours later with one short text, "Please, Mom, don't make this worse. I need some space." That word hit me like a slap. I had given her space all her life, space to grow, space to make mistakes, space to become her own person, and this is what she did with it. I sat in silence for a long time until I finally decided I could not just wait. I needed answers. I needed to look her in the eyes and hear why she did it. I drove to her best friend Sarah's house because I knew that is where she usually went when she wanted to hide. I parked outside and waited. The minutes turned into an hour, and just when I was about to give up, I saw her walking down the street, her suitcase rolling behind her, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses and her hair tied up in a careless bun. She looked carefree, almost happy, as if nothing had happened. My heart ached, but I stayed calm. I stepped out of the car and called her name. She froze, the color drained from her face. When she saw me, "Mom," she whispered, "What are you doing here?" I walked closer and said in the calmest voice I could manage, "Where is my car, Lily?" Her eyes darted around. She looked anywhere but at me. "Mom, please, I can explain." "No," I said. "You already explained, remember. You sold it for your trip. I just want to know, how much did you get for it?" She looked down at the ground and mumbled, $2,000. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. $2,000 for a car I took care of for 12 years. A car that had been through every storm with me. I asked her what she did with the money. She hesitated, then said, "I paid for my ticket to Paris." My chest tightened. Paris, the city she had been dreaming about since she was 13. She always said one day she would live there, study fashion design, walk the streets with a camera and notebook, and create something beautiful. But dreams do not excuse betrayal. I looked at her and said, "You sold something that meant everything to me, so you could chase something that might not even last a year." She snapped back, her tone sharp and angry. "You don't get it, Mom. You never supported my dream. You always tell me to be practical, to stay safe, to work hard and save money, but I am not like you. I want to live. I want to see the world. I want to be free. I stared at her, unable to speak for a moment, then finally said, being free does not mean hurting the people who love you. She looked away again and whispered, I will pay you back, I promise. But I could see in her eyes she didn't mean it. Not really. It was just something to say, to end the argument, to escape the guilt. I turned around and walked back to my car. I could hear her calling after me, Mom, please don't do this, don't make it worse. But it was already worse, far worse than she understood. When I got home, I sat in my kitchen staring at the empty wall. Again, the silence was no longer just quiet, it was hollow and angry. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about everything I had done for her, every birthday party, every school project, every time I stayed up late to make sure she had what she needed. And then I remembered all the times she had dismissed me lately, the way she rolled her eyes when I asked about her plans, the way she said, I don't need your help, Mom, as if independence was something she had invented. And I realized something: she had taken me for granted. She had taken everything I gave her and treated it like it was disposable. I knew I could not undo what she had done, but I could make her understand. I could show her what it feels like to lose something you love so deeply that its absence shakes your soul. So the next day, when she came home to pick up some of her things, I greeted her calmly. I smiled, even offered her tea. She looked confused, unsure if she should relax or run. I asked her to sit down. She did, but her hands fidgeted. The silence stretched between us like a wall. I looked her in the eyes and said, you sold my car for your dream trip, right? She nodded. Yes, Mom, I told you I will pay you back. I smiled again. Don't worry, I said. You won't have to. I already found a way to balance it. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? I leaned back and whispered softly, I sold your dream. Her confusion deepened, but I could see the fear rising behind her eyes. I did not explain, not yet. I wanted her to wonder, to feel the first crack of panic that I had felt when I saw that empty driveway. I wanted her to taste uncertainty, because sometimes the only way to make someone understand pain is to let them live it in return. The revenge plan. I remember the exact moment I decided I would not react with anger alone. I would respond with action, not to humiliate her, but to teach her a lesson about respect and consequences. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen, and I wrote down everything I could think of, every slight, every careless word, every time she treated my help like it was an annoyance and not a gift. I wrote until the page was full, until my hand hurt. The plan formed slowly, like a shape coming out of fog. It was not about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about making her feel the weight of what she had done and understand how trust can be broken and how hard it is to rebuild. The first thing I needed was a way to make her lose something she loved without destroying her life or her future that was important to me. I would not ruin her, but I would make her uncomfortable. I wanted consequences that matched the betrayal, not cruelty that would leave permanent scars. I thought about money and jobs and promises, because those were the things she valued most. After the car, she had sold my material, proof that she could be impulsive and selfish. She loved her dream of Paris more than our bond, so I decided to start there. I would challenge the dream. I would show her that chasing something without grounding it in responsibility could cost her dearly, but I would not take away her future. I would make her work for it. I began by calling the agency that had sold the car. I needed to know who had bought it and where it was taken. That call was the first piece of my puzzle. The woman on the other end gave me a name and an address. It turned out the buyer had taken it to a small lot on the edge of town. I wrote that down carefully. Next, I did something I never imagined I would do. I called a lawyer. I did not plan to press criminal charges. That was unnecessary and would only escalate things. I wanted a formal paper trail, something that showed that the sale had been irresponsible and that the car had belonged to me. The lawyer agreed to write a letter demanding information about the sale and outlining that I had not given consent for such a transaction involving a minor who still lived under my roof. The letter would not be aggressive, but it would be enough to make the buyer think twice and to alert any future buyers that this sale was contested. Then I began to think about the ticket to Paris and who had helped her book it. I contacted the airline and the travel site she used and asked for receipts, bookings, names, anything that could show when she purchased the ticket and with what card. I used the receipt to trace the payment and learned that she had used a prepaid card that had been topped up at a convenience store. I went to the store and asked what I could do to get surveillance footage. The clerk said footage was only kept for a few days, but sometimes the manager could pull an old clip if there was a good reason. I told him I needed to know if my daughter had been paying for something suspicious. He asked why, and I explained as best as I could without revealing the plan. He agreed to check the archives. I started talking to people gently. I called Sarah, her best friend, and asked her to be careful with Lily. I did not tell Sarah about the car or the plan. I asked only that she not enable Lily to hide or run away, that she should encourage her to talk to me. I wanted allies, not enemies. The more people who saw that I was calm, the less people would suspect that I was planning anything dramatic. The next part of the plan was the hardest for me because it required patience. I needed to create a situation where Lily would feel the loss of something she thought secure without me appearing petty or cruel. So I began to make small cuts in the safety net I used to hold for her for years. I tightened rules in the household, not as punishment, but as boundaries. I told her I would need the spare key back. I explained that after what happened, I could not feel comfortable leaving it where anyone could access it. She protested, but I stood my ground. I started to ask for receipts for money she said she needed. I asked for explanations when she wanted to borrow things. I sent small but firm messages about responsibility and accountability. I made it clear that the way to rebuild trust was through actions, not words. I also set a consequence for compensation. I told her calmly that if she wanted to go to Paris, she would have to contribute to it legitimately. I proposed a plan she could accept or refuse. She could take a job over the summer, work extra hours, and pay me back from her wages. She could apply for a student loan or a scholarship, or find a sponsor, but she could not simply take and expect forgiveness anymore. I did not speak about selling her dream. I did not reveal my full plan. I wanted her to feel the first tremor of insecurity, to wonder if the dream would remain as simple as packing a suitcase. I arranged small obstacles that required her to show commitment. I asked her to bring proof of enrollment in a course she claimed she would attend in Paris. I told her I would help, but only if she could show she had taken the first steps that would prove this was not a fantasy. I also contacted a local gallery where she said she hoped to intern and asked about opportunities. I did not ask them to refuse Her, I only wanted to know what she needed to qualify, what portfolio pieces, what references. I used that information later to set realistic expectations for her and to press gently that real dreams require work. I remember how her voice sounded the first time she realized I was serious. It was a mixture of panic and fear and then anger, but I stayed calm. That was vital in each conversation. I used a low, steady tone. I did not shout or cry. I listened, and I said, "I understand, but actions matter more than promises." Slowly the plan began to work, not because I had trapped her, but because I had changed the environment around her to require accountability. I could see the confusion in her eyes. She expected one thing to follow from selling my car, namely my meltdown. Instead, she got structure and firmness, which was worse for her because it left no dramatic way out, no room to play the victim. I also planted a seed outside the house. I called the buyer of the car and asked him if he would be willing to meet me at the lot to discuss the title and the possibility of returning the car while offering to pay a reasonable fee if needed. The buyer was suspicious, but he agreed because the lawyer had already sent a note making the sale contentious. When we met, I spoke politely. I did not accuse him. I explained that there had been a misunderstanding. We discussed options, and I offered to buy back the car at a fair price. The buyer hesitated and then agreed. He said he had paid more than $2,000 and that he had plans for the car, but he admitted he felt uneasy when he realized the sale might not have been legitimate. I arranged for the car to be returned conditionally with paperwork that transferred ownership back to me. This move was critical because it solved the practical loss, while also making Lily see the mess she had created. She watched the car come back into the driveway, and she did not celebrate. She only looked small and uncertain that night. I did not gloat. I only said calmly, "You sold something without asking, and you will now learn to fix it." The plan was not yet complete. I still needed her to rebuild the trust, and the only way was work and sacrifice on her part. I laid out the steps she had to take to earn her dream back, and slowly she began to move. I knew this was painful for both of us, but it was the right path to make her understand that dreams without responsibility can destroy what matters most. The breaking distance and the awakening the next few weeks were a blur of tension in the house. The air between us was heavy, but controlled like a storm that refused to break. Lily spoke to me only when she had to, and even then her words were clipped short, always wrapped in frustration. She used to be so full of laughter. When she was little, she would fill every corner of the house with her singing, her silly jokes, her questions about life. Now it was replaced by silence, the kind of silence that echoed off walls. I pretended not to notice her glares. I stayed calm, polite, collected. The calmness itself became my weapon because anger would have given her power. She wanted me to explode so she could blame me again, so she could say, "See, Mom never understands." But I refused to play that part. Instead, I made her face her choices. Every day she came home from her part-time job, tired, frustrated, and she saw the car parked outside, perfectly polished, shining under the porch light. It was a silent reminder of what she had lost and what she needed to rebuild. She asked me one evening if I could lend her some money to cover the last installment for her trip. She said she was trying to rebook her flight. I looked at her and said gently, "I am not stopping you from chasing your dream, Lily, but if you want to go, you will have to fund it yourself." This time her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, this is cruel. You are ruining my life." I took a deep breath and replied, "I am not ruining it. I am teaching you to build it." She stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her, but I could hear the faint sound of her crying through the walls. I wanted to go to her to hold her like I used to, but I stopped myself. This pain was necessary, I kept reminding myself of that, because I knew if I gave in too soon, the lesson would vanish like dust in the wind. One night, I found her sitting outside on the porch. The moonlight fell softly on her face, and for the first time in weeks, she looked small, not angry, just lost. She spoke quietly, without turning to look at me. "Mom, do you ever regret staying after Dad left?" I froze at the question. I sat beside her and said, "I did not stay because it was easy. I stayed because someone had to teach you that strength is not about running away." She looked down and nodded slowly. I think she understood more than she let on. We sat in silence for a long time, and for a moment I felt like maybe we were healing, but old wounds do not close that easily. A few days later, she came to me and said she had applied for a scholarship program that offered a summer internship in Paris. If she got it, everything, including housing and airfare, would be covered. She looked nervous when she said it, as if expecting me to laugh. But I smiled and said, "Good, that is what I wanted to see." I could tell she did not expect that answer. She blinked at me, confused. "You are not mad?" I shook my head. "No, Lily, I am proud of you for trying the right way." Her eyes softened, and for a brief second, I saw the little girl. She used to be the one who used to draw dresses with crayons and call them masterpieces. Days turned into weeks, and our routine slowly began to change. She worked longer hours, saved money, took online courses in design, and began sketching again. I noticed she no longer avoided eye contact. She was trying, and I appreciated that. Though I did not say it out loud, I could see the slow transformation. Guilt mixed with growth, pain mixed with purpose. It was working. She was learning responsibility through effort and humility, and I felt something in me soften too. One afternoon, as I came home from work, I found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by open notebooks. She had been studying French. I watched her for a moment before she noticed me. She looked up and said quietly, "I got the scholarship." My heart swelled with pride, but I kept my tone steady. "That is wonderful news, Lily." She hesitated, waiting for me to react fully. When I did not, she finally asked, "So you are not angry anymore?" I smiled gently. "No, I never was truly angry. I was hurt, but that is different." She frowned, confused. "What is the difference?" I said. "Anger wants to destroy. Hurt just wants to be healed." She looked away, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "I am sorry, Mom, for everything." I nodded. "I know, but sorry is not enough. You have to live better, not just apologize." She nodded too, and for the first time in months I believed her. The next few days were strangely peaceful. She helped around the house more, cooked dinner, once even cleaned the porch without being asked. It was like the storm had finally started to fade. One night, she brought out an old photo album, and we sat together, flipping through the pages, laughing at the memories. She pointed at a picture of me standing beside that car, the same one she sold, the same one now parked outside, and she said quietly, "I understand now why you loved it so much." I looked at her and said softly, "I did not love the car, Lily. I loved what it represented: freedom, responsibility, survival." She nodded and smiled, a small, sad smile that said she finally understood. "Everything but peace is fragile, especially when pride still lingers in hidden corners. I did not know then that the test was not over, that there was still one last storm waiting for both of us, because sometimes understanding is not enough. Life still needs proof, and the moment that proof arrives, it shakes everything you thought was finally healed. The final test and the climax. The morning the letter arrived, I thought it was just another bill or a reminder from the insurance company. It looked ordinary, a white envelope with my name printed neatly on the front. I almost tossed it aside, but something about the handwriting made me pause. It was elegant, formal, not from any company. I opened it slowly, and as my eyes scanned the words, my hands began to tremble. It was from the travel agency, the same one Lily had booked her Paris trip with. They were confirming a refund issued to my account for the ticket I never bought. Confusion flooded my mind. Then it clicked. The ticket she had bought before selling my car had been canceled weeks ago by me as part of the paperwork when I got my car back, and apparently due to a clerical delay, the refund had only just been processed, and now the money had been sent back to my name, not hers. I sat there staring at the letter for a long time, feeling the weight of the situation. It was a twist of fate, one that gave me the final decision, the one that would define the rest of our story. I could easily give her the money, let her use it to go to Paris, fulfill her scholarship plan, start her dream, or I could hold on to it, use it as the last lesson about trust and integrity. I spent the day thinking, walking around the house aimlessly. My reflection in the window looked older, more tired, but steadier. By evening, I made my choice that night. Lily came home, excited, glowing. She had just received her official acceptance for the internship. She hugged me so tightly I could feel her heart racing. She said, "Mom, they chose me. I am actually going to Paris." I smiled and said, "That is wonderful, honey, but we need to talk." Her face shifted from joy to worry. "What is it?" I handed her the letter and watched her read it. Her expression changed slowly from confusion to realization to fear. She looked up at me, her voice trembling. "Mom, this refund, this was my ticket money, right?" I nodded. She whispered, "So you got the refund instead of me?" I nodded again. She looked terrified, waiting for my next words. I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I did, and now I have to decide what to do with it." Her mouth fell open. "Mom, please don't. I worked so hard for this. Please don't take this away from me." I stayed calm and said, "Sit down, Lily." She did reluctantly. I looked her in the eyes and said, "When you sold my car, you did not ask. You just acted on impulse without respect for what that car meant to me. You did it because you wanted to chase your dream, and I get that, I do, but you need to understand that every dream comes with responsibility." I leaned closer and said, "You cannot build your future on something you took by breaking someone else's trust." She was crying now, shaking. "Mom, please. I know I was wrong, but I learned. I swear I worked for this. I did everything you asked. I earned it. Please." I closed my eyes for a moment because hearing her beg tore me apart, but I had to stay firm. I said, "I know. You worked for it, and I am proud of that. But the real test is not just how hard you work when things are easy, it is how you handle the moments when life turns unfair." I told her the truth, that the refund had come to my name legally, that I could choose to give it back or not. Her tears fell faster. She said, "Mom, please, I will never forgive myself if I lose this chance." I looked at her and said softly, "I believe you, but I also believe that forgiveness without change means nothing." She dropped her face into her hands and sobbed, the kind of sob that came from deep guilt and exhaustion. I let her cry. I waited until she stopped, then I said, "Stand up." She looked at me confused. I handed her an envelope, the same one she had given me months ago when she sold my car. I had kept it inside, was the original deed to the car now fully restored in my name. I told her this car was my independence, but it became my burden. It made me realize I was holding on to the past too tightly, just as you were rushing too fast into the future. We both needed to learn balance. I opened a drawer, took out another envelope, and placed it beside the first. This one held the refund money. I said, "This is yours, but only if you can tell me what you learned from all of this." She looked up, her eyes red from crying. She whispered, "I learned that dreams mean nothing if they destroy the people who love you. I learned that trust is not something you demand, it is something you earn. And I learned that freedom comes with responsibility." I smiled for the first time in a long while. "That is the answer I was waiting for." I handed her the money. She clutched it in disbelief and then threw her arms around me, crying harder this time, but it was a different kind of crying. It was relief, gratitude, healing. We stood there holding each other in silence. The months of distance, pain, and anger melting away in that single embrace. A few days later, she left for Paris. I drove her to the airport. We did not talk much during the ride, but the silence felt warm, not empty. As she walked toward the departure gate, she turned back, smiled through tears, and said, "Thank you, Mom, for giving me back my dream." I smiled and said, "Thank you for giving me back my faith." The moment she disappeared into the crowd, I sat in the car, and for the first time in years, I felt peace when I came home. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt cold. The driveway no longer looked empty. It looked complete, because this time the emptiness was not loss, it was space for new beginnings. I stood there under the evening sky and thought about everything that had happened, about love and betrayal and the strange way life teaches lessons through pain, and I realized that revenge had never been my goal. It was always about awakening, about guiding her toward understanding. She had sold my car behind my back, but in return, I had sold her dream only to buy it back for her with something far more valuable: wisdom. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered to myself, sometimes we have to lose what we love to learn how to truly cherish it. And that is what family is, not about never breaking, but about learning how to rebuild stronger than before. Resolution. And the moral months passed after Lily left for Paris, and life slowly returned to a calm rhythm. Though the house felt quieter, it was no longer empty. It was peaceful. I still woke up early every morning, made my coffee, watched the sunlight spill across the kitchen floor. But something inside me had changed. I no longer felt bitterness when I thought about what she had done. Instead, I felt something softer, something like understanding. I realized that the journey we had both gone through was not just about a car, or money, or even betrayal. It was about growth, about learning that love between a parent and a child is not fragile. It bends, it breaks, but somehow it still survives. I began receiving letters from Lily. Every week she wrote about her classes, her struggles, her small victories. She wrote about the first time she walked the streets of Paris with her sketchbook, how she cried when she saw the Eiffel Tower, not because of its beauty, but because it reminded her of the night she almost lost everything. She wrote about how hard it was living alone, how she missed home, the smell of my cooking, the sound of my voice, and every letter ended with the same line, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I would read those words and feel tears fill my eyes every single time I had spent so long wondering if I had done the right thing, if my plan to teach her a lesson had gone too far, but those letters told me I had done exactly what was needed, because what she learned there she could never have learned. From comfort, sometimes love needs to be tough. It needs to hold its ground, even when it hurts, because pain shapes character better than ease ever will. I remember one particular letter. It came on a rainy afternoon. She had written about a friend she met in Paris, another girl her age who had also left home, chasing her dream, but unlike Lily, she had no one waiting for her. When things went wrong, her family had cut her off completely, and Lily wrote that watching her struggle made her realize how lucky she was to still have someone who believed in her even after she had broken that trust. She ended that letter by saying, "Mom, now I understand what you meant when you said freedom comes with responsibility. I will never forget that again." I sat by the window that day, watching the rain fall, and smiled quietly. It felt like the story had come full circle, not in some grand way, but in a quiet, meaningful one. I had taught her something, and she had grown from it. That was all a parent could ever ask for. Time moved on, and seasons changed. The car remained in the driveway, a symbol not of betrayal anymore, but of lessons learned. Every time I drove it, I felt proud, not because it was mine, but because it reminded me of how far we both had come from that morning. When I found the driveway empty one evening, I received a call from her. She sounded happy, confident, mature in a way I had never heard before. She told me her designs had been chosen for a small exhibition and that one of her pieces was inspired by me. She said it was called Strength in Silence. I felt my heart swell with pride. I told her I was proud of her, and that I always knew she would make something beautiful out of the chaos she had caused. She laughed and said, "Mom, I know now why you did what you did. You did not sell my dream. You just made me earn it." We both laughed, and in that laughter, I heard forgiveness, healing, and love all tangled together. Later that night, I sat on the porch under the quiet stars, thinking about everything that had happened, the anger, the tears, the confusion, the hard lessons, and finally the peace. I thought about how easily our relationship could have broken forever. But it didn't, because love, when it is real, fights back. It does not walk away even when it is wounded. It waits, it rebuilds, it forgives. And as I sat there, I realized something else. Revenge had never been the answer. The power was never in hurting her back. It was in helping her grow, by showing her the mirror of her own actions and letting her face what she had done the right way. Sometimes we think revenge means making someone suffer, but true justice is letting someone learn the truth and watching them rise from it stronger and wiser. I smiled to myself, thinking that maybe this was the last piece of my own lesson. To let go, to forgive fully, to move forward. As the night deepened, I whispered softly into the air, as if speaking to her, though she was miles away. I forgive you, Lily, completely, and thank you for teaching me that even broken trust can bloom again if love is patient. When I went back inside, I looked at the photo of us on the living room wall, the one where she was little, sitting in my lap, holding her toy car and smiling wide back. Then I had no idea what kind of woman she would become, but now I knew she would be fine. She had learned to drive her own life, and I had learned to let her go. I turned off the lights, and as I climbed the stairs, I felt light, free, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. The story that began with betrayal had ended with understanding, and that was more powerful than revenge ever could be. And in that quiet, I knew the moral of it all. Sometimes love has to hurt before it heals. Sometimes we lose things to find what truly matters, and sometimes the only way to teach is to let life do the talking, because pain fades but lessons stay forever. The after years. It has been 5 years since that stormy chapter of our lives ended, and so much has changed. Lily now lives in Paris, full-time, working for a fashion company that once only existed in her dreams. She visits home once or twice a year, and every time she walks through that front door, I see not the impulsive, reckless girl who once sold my car, but a woman who learned what responsibility really means. She talks differently now. Her words carry thought, her eyes carry stories, and every time she speaks about her journey, I can tell she still remembers what it took to get there. Sometimes on quiet evenings, we sit on the porch sipping tea and talking about the old days. She often brings it up with a shy smile. "Mom, remember when I sold your car and almost destroyed everything?" I always laugh and say yes. "And remember how I sold your dream?" She grins and says, "That was the best thing you ever did, because it made me realize dreams are not gifts, they are goals." I nod silently, because that one line holds all the truth in the world. She does not know how many nights I cried, how many times I doubted my decision, or how many times I wanted to run after her and bring her home, but I never tell her, because those tears were my lessons too. She had to grow up, and I had to let her, and that was harder than anything else. Letting go of your own child and trusting life to teach her. When she comes home now, she always insists on driving that same car, the one she once sold. She treats it differently now, with care, with respect, almost as if it is a symbol of her second chance, and maybe it is. She polishes it before taking it out. She parks it carefully. She never complains when it needs repairs. Sometimes I watch her from the window and feel proud, not because of the car itself, but because of what it represents: responsibility and maturity. One evening she handed me a small wrapped box. She said, "Mom, open it." I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a silver keychain shaped like a tiny car, engraved with the words, "To the woman who taught me how to drive my life." I looked at her and felt tears fill my eyes. She hugged me tight and whispered, "I will never forget the lesson you gave me. I will never take you or anything you gave me for granted again." That night I sat by the window, again the same spot where years ago I had stared at an empty driveway full of anger and heartbreak, but this time my heart was full of peace, full of gratitude. I realized that sometimes life needs to break something before it can rebuild it stronger. I thought about how different things could have been if I had just shouted, punished, or ignored, instead of teaching through consequence. Real change comes from understanding, not punishment, and that was something I had learned the hard way. A few months later, she called again from Paris. Her voice was excited. She told me she had been offered a promotion and that her company wanted to send her to New York for a design showcase. I could hear the pride in her tone, and all I said was, "Go, make me proud, and remember who you are." She laughed and said, "I will always remember, because you never let me forget." As I hung up the phone, I realized that maybe every parent goes through this cycle of pain and peace, of anger and acceptance, of holding on and letting go. I looked around the house, quiet but warm, filled with memories, laughter, and lessons, and I smiled. It was not perfect, but it was real. That night, as I prepared For bed, I whispered one last thought to myself. Maybe forgiveness is not a single act. Maybe it is a journey, like love, something we walk through again and again, until one day we look back and realize we have reached peace without even noticing it. I turned off the lights and looked out the window at the driveway, the same one that had once been the center of all my pain. Now it was just a driveway, nothing more, nothing less, but deep down I knew it held the story of two hearts that had broken each other only to rebuild stronger together. And as I closed my eyes, I thought to myself, sometimes losing something material can lead you to find something far greater: trust, love, and strength, and that is what truly lasts forever. Legacy. Years later, when time had turned the sharp edges of that memory into something soft and distant, I found myself standing in the same driveway, watching a little girl run in circles. She was laughing, her voice echoing like sunlight in the wind. Lily stood nearby, watching her daughter play, her eyes full of the same light she used to have as a child. Mom, she called out, smiling, can you believe she loves cars too? I laughed softly and said, I can believe it. It runs in the family. She chuckled and said, I told her the story about your car. You know, not all of it, of course, but enough for her to understand that actions have consequences and that we must respect what we are given. I smiled because hearing my daughter teach her daughter the same lesson I once taught her made me realize how life always comes full circle. Lily sat down beside me on the porch, her hands resting on her knees, her voice calm and thoughtful. I used to think you were cruel for what you did, Mom, she said. I thought you wanted to hurt me, but now that I'm a mother, I understand you were protecting me from myself. I turned to her and said softly, we never want to hurt our children, Lily, but sometimes pain is the only teacher they will listen to. She nodded and said, I know that now. She looked at her daughter again and added quietly, I just hope I can be as strong as you were when my turn comes. I smiled because I knew she already was. Strength was not in punishing, it was in loving enough to stand firm when everything inside you wanted to give in. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Everything that once hurt so deeply now felt like a distant echo, a necessary chapter in a story that had ended with love. That night, Lily stayed over. We had dinner together, with laughter filling the house again, the same house that had once been silent, cold, and heavy, now felt alive again. After dinner, Lily showed me photos of her new life, her husband, her work, her child. She was proud and happy, and I could see in every picture the woman she had become: strong, kind, patient, and wise. Before she left the next morning, she hugged me tightly and said, Mom, I hope someday when she is older she will understand that story just like I did, and that she will never forget that love is not about saying yes, it's about knowing when to say no. I kissed her forehead and said she will, because you will show her the way. After she left, I stood by the window again, the same window where years ago I had cried and watched an empty driveway. This time I was watching a car drive away, carrying not loss but legacy. My heart was full and my mind calm. I realized that everything we do as parents leaves a mark, even the mistakes, even the hard choices, even the silence. It all becomes part of the story that shapes the next generation. I looked at the car once more, gleaming under the sunlight, and whispered quietly, thank you for the lesson you gave me. You were Never just a car, you were the bridge that helped me find my daughter again. I smiled, turned away, and walked back inside. The air felt light, the house warm, and for the first time in many years, I felt that the circle was truly complete. The pain had turned into wisdom, the anger into love, the lesson into legacy. And in that quiet realization, I knew that some stories never really end. They just evolve into memories that guide us forward. I sat down with a cup of tea, looked at the family photo on the wall, and whispered one last thought. Sometimes life takes from us what we think we need, only to return it later in a better form, stronger, wiser, and filled with meaning. And that is what happened to me. I lost a car, but found my daughter. I lost my patience, but found my strength. And most of all, I learned that love, when it is real, survives everything, even betrayal. And that is the greatest revenge of all, forgiveness. The reflection sometimes when the nights are quiet and the wind hums softly through the trees, I find myself sitting by that same window, thinking about how far we have all come. The memories do not sting anymore. They simply exist like old pages in a book, well read and well loved. I can see it all clearly now. That morning, I discovered my car missing, the disbelief, the anger, the heartbreak, the decision to teach her the lesson she needed, the silence, the distance, and finally the forgiveness. Every part of it carved me into the woman I am today, stronger, wiser, and calmer. I realize now that revenge is never about hurting someone. It is about reclaiming your power. It is about standing tall when life pushes you down. It is about turning betrayal into purpose and pain into strength. People often think that forgiveness is weakness, but it is not. Forgiveness is courage. It takes far more strength to let go than to hold on to anger. I learned that the hard way. I remember how small I felt when I first saw my empty driveway. I thought my world had collapsed, but looking back, I see that moment as the beginning of something new. It was the day I stopped being just a mother and became a teacher, not of subjects, but of life itself. Lily once told me that my reaction to what she did changed her forever. She said that if I had shouted or punished her, she would have rebelled more. But because I stayed calm and showed her consequence through action, she was forced to reflect on herself, and that reflection changed her. I think about that often. It reminds me that love is not measured by how much we give, but by how wisely we guide. Sometimes love must be silent, sometimes it must be firm, and sometimes it must step back and let the other person fall so they can learn to rise on their own. I look at our story now and see not betrayal but transformation, not pain but growth, not revenge but redemption. Life has a way of turning chaos into clarity if we are patient enough to let it unfold. And as I sit here, I also think about all the parents who might be going through the same pain, watching their children make mistakes, feeling helpless, angry, and heartbroken. If any of them were to ask me what to do, I would tell them this: do not give up on them, but do not shield them either. Let them face the wind, let them understand the weight of their choices, because one day they will thank you for it, even if it takes years, even if it takes heartbreak, even if it takes losing something precious, because growth rarely comes wrapped in comfort. It comes in storms and tears and moments of silence that test everything inside you. I finish my tea and stand up, looking out at the stars scattered across the dark sky. They Remind me of all the small moments that once felt unbearable but now shine as lessons, each one a reminder that love outlasts everything, betrayal, anger, distance. It outlasts them all, because love is not just a feeling, it is a decision, and every day we choose to keep it alive. I whisper softly into the night, thank you, life, for every heartbreak, every tear, every mistake, because they were not endings. They were beginnings disguised in pain, and as I turn off the lights and head upstairs, I feel a sense of peace so deep it almost feels like grace. Maybe that is what life is all about, not revenge, not victory, not even perfect endings, but understanding, learning, and finding peace in knowing you did your best, and sometimes that is enough. Maybe that has always been enough. The closing chapter. Years later, when my hair had turned silver and the world had slowed down around me, I often found myself sitting on the same porch where everything had begun, the same wooden chair, the same quiet air, but a completely different heart. Life had come full circle in ways I never imagined. Lily visited often with her husband and daughter, who was now a teenager, bright, full of energy, full of dreams. Sometimes when I watched her talk about her future, I could see traces of the girl her mother once was: ambitious, fearless, impatient. But this time I saw something else too: balance, understanding. She would glance at me with respect in her eyes, a kind of quiet admiration that made my heart swell. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, painting the yard in golden light, she sat beside me, her notebook open, sketching something. Her mother was inside helping with dinner, and I asked her, "What are you drawing?" She smiled and said, "A story, Grandma." "Yours?" I laughed softly and asked, "What kind of story?" She said, "The one Mom told me about, the car, the choices, the lesson," she said, "it taught her everything about what love really means." I felt my throat tighten as I watched her sketch a small car under a big tree with two figures standing beside it, a mother and daughter facing each other, one holding keys, the other holding a dream. I realized then that our story had become more than just a lesson. It had become a legacy, something passed down not through words, but through the quiet strength that lives in families who have survived storms together. When Lily came outside and saw what her daughter was drawing, she smiled and said softly, "Looks like she already understands." I nodded and said she does, because she comes from a line of strong women. That night, as we all sat around the dinner table, laughing, sharing food and memories, I watched them both and felt something deep and powerful inside me. Peace, complete peace, the kind that only comes when life has finished teaching its hardest lessons. After dinner, Lily hugged me and said, "Mom, I will never forget what you did for me. You changed me forever." And I said, "No, Lily, you changed yourself. I just gave you the mirror." She smiled with tears in her eyes and said, "Maybe, but I needed you to hold that mirror." I touched her hand and said, "That is what love is, not fixing, not forcing, but holding the mirror until they are ready to see themselves clearly." After they left that night, I stepped outside again. The moon was high, the driveway quiet, the same driveway that had once been empty and full of pain. Now it was full of memories, laughter, and love. I ran my hand along the car parked there, still shining after all these years, and whispered, "Thank you for everything. You were more than metal and wheels. You were the start of everything I did not know I needed to learn." I sat back down and let the night wrap around me, gently thinking about how strange life is, how something that begins with loss can end with such deep gratitude, how something that once hurt so much can later become the reason we smile, how love always finds a way to heal what was once broken. I realized that every betrayal holds a hidden gift, the chance to rebuild something better. Every heartbreak opens the door to understanding, and every act of revenge loses its meaning when forgiveness steps in, because forgiveness is the real ending. It is the quiet victory, the one that does not need applause or proof. It just lives silently in your heart. I took a deep breath and whispered softly into the night, if I could go back, I would not change a thing, because every moment led us here, to this peace, to this love, to this lesson. And that is what life is meant to be, not perfect but real, not painless but purposeful. And as I closed my eyes, the last thought that crossed my mind was this: sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well, loving deeply, and leaving behind a story worth remembering. The final reflection: years passed quietly after that, and the seasons rolled through my life like gentle waves. Time softened everything, even the sharpest edges of old memories. Now, when I think back to that time, it feels like watching a movie of someone else's life, distant yet deeply familiar. I still remember every detail, though the pain has long faded. The sound of the rain that morning when I discovered the car was gone, the hollow ache in my chest, the sleepless nights wondering where I went wrong, and then the slow, patient rebuilding of trust. All of it carved meaning into my heart and taught me more about love than anything else ever could. I learned that love is not about control, it is about guidance. It is not about holding tightly, but knowing when to let go, when to allow space for mistakes and redemption. I had once thought betrayal was the end of everything, but now I see it was the beginning. It forced me to look deeper, to understand that people, especially our children, are not perfect. They will stumble, they will fall, they will disappoint us, but that does not mean we stop loving them. It means we love them differently, wiser, stronger, with faith instead of fear. Sometimes when Lily and her family come to visit, I watch her daughter and see the spark of youth and dreams. I remember the fire that once burned in her mother, and I smile knowing that if she ever makes the same mistakes her mother did, she will not be lost, because her mother will know how to guide her without anger, without bitterness, only with understanding and strength. The cycle will continue, but it will be lighter, easier, because the lessons have already been learned and passed down. That thought gives me comfort. It makes me believe that every hardship carries a quiet purpose hidden within the pain. It teaches us something that becomes the foundation for someone else's peace. Years ago, I thought my heart would never heal from what happened, but today it is whole. It beats with calm, steady love, not the fragile love of expectations, but the grounded love of acceptance. When I walk by the driveway now, I sometimes run my hand over that car and smile. It has aged just like me, its paint a little dull, its wheels slower, but it still runs strong, just like the bond between me and my daughter. The car that once symbolized betrayal has become a symbol of resilience. Every scratch, every dent tells a story of growth. It stands there not as a reminder of loss, but of survival, of lessons learned through pain and turned into wisdom on quiet nights. I often sit under the same tree with a cup of tea and think about how life works in mysterious ways. We try to control it, shape it, protect the ones We love from its storms, but in the end, life knows what it is doing. It takes us through chaos, only to show us clarity. It breaks us just enough to help us rebuild stronger. It makes us lose just enough to appreciate what remains. Sometimes I hear my daughter's voice in my head from all those years ago, full of anger and youth, shouting, "Mom, you don't understand." And I smile now, because I did understand. I just loved her enough to let her find out on her own. And she did. She found herself, she found her dream, and she found her way back home. Maybe that is all any parent ever hopes for, that their child finds their way back home in the end. When I look back at my life, I see not one story, but many woven together by love, by mistakes, by forgiveness, and by growth. If I could leave one message behind, it would be this: betrayal can break you, but it can also build you, depending on what you do with it. Revenge might bring satisfaction for a moment, but forgiveness brings peace for a lifetime. When we choose to forgive, we do not erase the past, we simply stop letting it control us, and that is the real victory, the real closure, the real revenge, to move forward happy, at peace, unshaken by what once hurt you deeply. As I finish my tea and the night grows still, I whisper one final truth into the air, not for anyone to hear, but for my own heart. Sometimes love is not about keeping everything perfect. It is about staying when it is hardest to stay. It is about forgiving when you have every reason not to. And it is about believing that even the deepest betrayal can lead to the purest kind of love, and that is how my story ends. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with peace, and that peace is the greatest gift life ever gave me. Quiet years now, life has slowed into a gentle rhythm. Mornings come with the sound of birds and soft sunlight filtering through the curtains. There is no rush, no noise, no lingering shadow from the past. I spend most of my days tending to my small garden, reading the books I never had time for, and watching the world move quietly around me. Every now and then I hear from Lily. She calls from some faraway city, always full of excitement and warmth. Her voice still carries that spark of ambition, but now it is steady, grounded. She speaks about her projects, about her family, about how grateful she is for everything she once took for granted. She tells me how her daughter is growing fast, already showing signs of becoming an artist, just like her mother and grandmother. I smile because I know that the lessons we learned years ago will live on through her. One afternoon, Lily came home with her family. It had been almost a year since I last saw them. She looked radiant, calmer than ever. Her daughter ran straight into my arms, laughing and telling me she had won an art competition at school. She said, "Grandma, I drew something inspired by you." I asked her what it was, and she said it was a drawing of a car, but not just any car. It had wings, and she said it was called Freedom. I felt tears rise in my eyes, and I hugged her tight, because that single word captured everything. Our story had been about freedom to dream, freedom to fail, and most importantly, freedom to forgive. That evening, we all sat outside under the tree where I had spent so many lonely nights thinking about the past. Now that same tree was covered in lights. Laughter and love surrounded it, and as I listened to their voices blending with the night air, I felt the kind of happiness that does not need words. After dinner, Lily and I sat quietly for a while. She looked at me and said softly, "Mom, I hope someday I can be half the woman you are." I smiled and told her, "You already are. You found strength through your mistakes, and that is the only kind that last." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, and said, "I used to think what you did was cruel, but now I see it was love, the hardest kind of love, but the kind that saves us both." We sat there in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. I looked at her and said, "Sometimes love has to break before it becomes real." She took my hand and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I squeezed her hand and said, "Thank you for coming back to me." Later that night, when everyone had gone to sleep, I stepped outside. The moonlight glowed softly over the garden. The car sat quietly by the driveway, silver under the stars. I walked up to it, ran my hand along the hood, and smiled. It had aged gracefully like the story it carried. I whispered to it, "You have seen everything: joy, anger, loss, forgiveness, and now peace. Thank you for staying this long." I looked up at the sky and thought about how strange and beautiful life is, how it takes us through storms only to bring us to calm shores where we can finally breathe freely. I realized that this peace was not the absence of pain, it was the understanding that pain had a purpose. It had shaped me, shaped Lily, shaped the generations that came after, and now it was simply part of our story. Not a wound, just a scar that told where we had been. I turned back toward the house, its windows glowing softly with warmth and laughter, and I smiled. I knew that one day when I am gone, Lily will sit here too, perhaps, with her own silver hair and her daughter beside her, and she will tell this story again, not as a warning, but as a reminder that love is stronger than mistakes and forgiveness is stronger than pride. And maybe her daughter will tell it again someday, until it becomes less of a story and more of a truth, woven into our family like sunlight through leaves. That thought made me smile. I went inside, turned off the lights, and whispered good night to the house, to the past, to everything that once hurt and now healed. As I lay in bed, the last thought that drifted through my mind was simple: sometimes the things we lose lead us to the things we were meant to find, and that is what happened to me. I lost a car, but found peace. I lost control, but found love. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered. The last dawn. The years have slipped by softly, like pages turning in a book. I have grown older, slower, but gentler too. My hands have wrinkles now. My hair carries the color of time, but my heart feels light, free of all the burdens it once carried. I wake up every morning before the sun rises and sit by the window with my cup of tea, the same window that once framed heartbreak now frames peace. Sometimes I watch the birds fly across the sky, and I think about how everything changes, yet somehow everything remains connected: life, family, forgiveness, the small invisible threads that tie us all together. Lily still calls every week, her voice full of warmth and laughter, and sometimes she sends photos of her life, her studio, her family, her daughter who is now grown and chasing dreams of her own. Every time I see her in those pictures, I smile because I know that the mistakes that once hurt us have turned into wisdom that guides her path. One morning I received a parcel from Lily. It was a book beautifully bound with golden edges, and on the cover it said, "Lessons from the Driveway." I opened it carefully. Inside were stories she had written, inspired by our past, each one carrying a message about love, patience, and redemption. At the end of the book, she had written a note: "Mom, this is for you, the woman who turned betrayal into wisdom and anger into strength. Thank you for teaching me that forgiveness is the greatest form of love." I closed the book and felt tears of joy fill I had not realized until that moment how much our story had meant to her, how deeply it had shaped her. She had turned our pain into art, into words that could help others heal. That day, I walked outside. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting gold across the sky. I looked at the car still parked in the same place where everything had begun, its paint faded, its wheels still strong. I smiled and whispered, "We did it, you and I. We made it through." I touched the hood, gently feeling the cool metal under my palm, and for a moment I could almost hear the echoes of the past, the sound of a slammed door, the silence that followed, the tears, the laughter, and the forgiveness that came after all of it. Now, just memories, soft and kind. I took a deep breath and looked toward the horizon, thinking about all the parents in the world who might be standing where I once stood, wondering if they did the right thing, if love really survives betrayal. And the answer came easily: yes, it does, because love is not about never being hurt. It is about choosing to stay soft even after you are hurt. It is about believing in second chances even when trust is broken. It is about teaching not through anger but through patience. I went back inside, sat at my desk, and began to write a letter for Lily, something I wanted her to have someday when I am no longer here. I wrote, "My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, it means time has done what it always does. It has moved forward and taken me with it. But before you close this chapter, I want you to remember this love is never lost. Even when it changes shape, it lives in every word, every lesson, every choice we make. You once sold my car and broke my heart, but you also taught me what real forgiveness means, and for that, I will always thank you. I hope when life tests you again, you will remember that peace is not found in revenge, but in understanding. Be kind, even when the world is not. Be patient, even when love feels heavy, and always believe that no mistake can destroy what is meant to heal. Love, Mom." I folded the letter, placed it inside the book, and smiled. I knew she would find it someday, and when she did, she would understand everything completely. The sun had risen fully now, light filling every corner of the room. I sat back and watched it, feeling the warmth spread across my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt that my story had truly reached its end, not a sad end, not a bitter one, but a quiet, beautiful one, where every wound had turned into wisdom, every scar into strength, and every tear into love. I closed my eyes, whispered thank you to life for all it had given and taken, and in that stillness I realized something simple yet eternal. The heart that forgives is the heart that truly lives. Epilogue. The years went on quietly and peacefully, and I learned to live with a kind of calm that I had never known before. Sometimes I would sit by my window with a cup of tea and think about how far we had come from that painful moment when everything had fallen apart, to the steady warmth that now filled our lives. I often thought about forgiveness, not the kind that comes easily, but the kind that grows slowly over time, like a flower pushing through hard ground. I realized that forgiveness is not about forgetting what someone did. It is about choosing peace over pain, choosing to move forward. Instead of standing still, one afternoon, I found an old photograph of Lily when she was little, sitting in the front seat of that car, her small hands gripping the steering wheel, pretending to drive. I smiled, remembering how she used to say, "Mom, one day this car will take me to my dreams." And in a way she was right. It did, but not in the way she expected. It took her through heartbreak, Through lessons, through change, and eventually through redemption, that car had become more than a machine. It had been the symbol of our journey, the journey from pride to humility, from anger to understanding, from loss to love. I decided to frame that photo and hang it in the living room, not as a reminder of what was lost, but of what was found. When Lily came over and saw it, she touched the frame and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." I asked, "For what?" And she said, "For never giving up on me." I told her that a mother's love is not about agreeing with everything her child does, it is about standing strong when they fall and showing them how to rise again. She hugged me tightly, and in that embrace, I felt the years of distance dissolve into nothing. We were whole again, not perfect, not without scars, but stronger because of them. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the soft hum of the night outside, I thought about how strange life is. It gives you storms to teach you calm, it gives you loss to teach you gratitude, it gives you betrayal to teach you truth, and it gives you time to turn pain into wisdom. I realized then that my story was not just about a car or a dream. It was about love in its truest form, unconditional, imperfect, and unbreakable. I whispered softly to myself, if this is what it takes to learn love, then every moment was worth it. I closed my eyes and smiled, knowing that the next morning, when the sun rose, it would rise on a world made lighter by forgiveness and brighter by love. And that was enough. The end.